Hello, everyone. We are so fortunate today to have with us Gunnar Lovelace, who is the CEO and founder of Good Money. This company's raised $30 million already. You don't want to miss this conversation.
Welcome to the Your Mark on the World show with your champion of social good, Devin D. Thorpe.
Gunnar, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. So excited about what you do, and it's an honor to be on your show.
Well, thank you. We're thrilled to have you and excited to talk to you about what you're doing. I think what you're doing with Good Money is just central to one of the best examples of the way our traditional banking system is failing low-income Americans. Tell us a little bit about Good Money.
Yes, so Good Money is a conscious banking platform with best-in-class mobile banking services that makes every customer an owner for the first time in history in a purely digital mobile-first environment. And if you really look at banking and financial services broadly, it's tied to so many of the problems that we face, both from environmental, social inequity, wealth concentration. And it hasn't been disrupted by the direct-to-consumer wave the way that, say, Netflix and Amazon have disrupted other industries. That disruption is happening now. There's no reason to go to a physical brick-and-mortar location. And we think that as part of transforming the kind of underlying dynamics of a mobile-first banking platform, that we want to democratize access to ownership and make everybody an owner. Because if you look at any consumer brand in capitalism today, the value of that brand comes directly from people buying from it. And so why shouldn't people expect to own the businesses that they buy from as an intrinsic part of their purchasing behavior?
Now, it is an interesting part of a shift. And, you know, I've been excited about co-ops and ESOPs for a long time, but this is part of something I almost dare call a trend now toward consumers rather than employees becoming the owners of the companies that they do business with. So it's a brilliant model. You know, what we see, Gunnar, is that a lot of people feel forced to use payday lenders and check cashing services in place of traditional banking services for a variety of reasons. How are you addressing those issues with Good Money?
Yeah, so I'd say just to clearly frame the problem, the average US consumer today spends $360 a year for a shitty banking product where banks pay practically zero on your money as a customer, then leverage your money on a 10x ratio to go fund things like the Dakota Access Pipeline and private prisons, and make a bunch of money on that and then pay you nothing as a consumer. Just kind of say that out loud, that I'm going to give you money to make money on my money. Messing things up while paying me nothing is the definition of insanity. You double click even a little bit further than that, you know, the top banks today make $30 billion a year in overdraft fees just out of people's checking accounts. And they will run the large check first so that all of the small checks in a check clearing cycle cause an overdraft fee. They then run and share a blacklist amongst each other so that if you don't pay the overdraft fees, you get blacklisted out of the traditional banking system into a much more predatory and pernicious prepaid debit market and payroll market system. So that's the state of affairs. You know, 40 plus million Americans have been driven out of the banking system into this very predatory system because of the way that the banks use blacklists and have this kind of very pernicious overdraft fees. So, you know, there's two different sides to this that we're working on. One is we're making it very, very easy for young people to be able to have all of the banking services that they need right on their phone, and to realign the incentives with them as owners for the first time in history. And the second part of that is because of the way that we put our back end together, we're actually able to invite those 40 million Americans that have been blacklisted out of the system back into a no-fee banking platform that doesn't have a check minimum, doesn't have ATM charges at 35,000 locations, and makes it very easy for people to get back into an equitable and fair financial system.
Now, where does the money sit? You have described Good Money not as a bank, but as a banking platform. Where does the money go at night?
So we have partner banks that are nationally chartered, FDIC insured. The deposits sit in treasuries, and there's a liquidity management program that allows that to be perfectly liquid for the customer. That's FDIC insured up to $250,000. And that's how we're able to pay a high yield on the account. We just give the entire profit center of that treasuries, which is a 2% cash, to the customer. And then we supplement that with additional equity as part of them being a customer and having their deposits with us. So you have a safe FDIC insured infrastructure that has deposits sitting in treasuries.
Now, I imagine, just because of the way the banking system works, that what you are offering are checkless checking accounts. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we have the ability to have automated outbound payments, photo check deposits, so that you get the analog to digital, the ability to do that at ATM machines nationally at 35,000 locations, and then a one-off checks that can be generated. But yeah, the average millennial is not writing or using checks.
Right. But that's also how you're able to avoid the overdraft fees, largely, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And that said, I mean, there are other digital banking services where there are overdraft fees still. We are just choosing not to have overdraft fees, and we think that that's just like a very basic fairness.
Sure. But it also means then when someone swipes a card, let's be clear, when someone swipes a card and there's not enough money in the account, you don't get to buy your soda pop at the 7-Eleven.
Yep, that's right. But that's way better for the consumer, because it means that they're not absorbing a $25 to $35 NS overdraft fee.
That's right. You're not paying $35 for the soda.
Yeah. Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit more about the ownership. How much of the ownership of the enterprise will go to the customers?
So, the candid truth is we don't entirely know. Like, nobody has done what we're about to do. I had the very kind of unique personal experience of growing up on a hippie commune. And so, my last business, Thrive Market, is effectively a 21st century co-op for making healthy living accessible to everybody. And hippies have been dreaming of alternative banking systems for decades. So I find myself in this kind of unusual position of consumerizing hippie dreams in a way that keeps the values but makes it more accessible. And so I started 2 co-ops in college. I've been a student of that movement for a long time. That said, it is the whole game of direct to consumer digital platform building is you have to get people's attention. First of all, everybody's very, very busy. And then you have to drive habit formation once you've gotten their attention. And so the way that you distribute incentives, and in this case, the vast majority of those incentives are ownership, are driven based upon understanding what our customer needs and how we can incentivize them to take actions over time that are good for them, and also lock in high quality habit formation. So what's interesting about the model fundamentally is that it's not that we're setting aside some finite pool of equity for the customer and that we're locked into that finite pool. It's actually, we're fundamentally increasing circulation over time. And the whole dynamic of that is really based upon the fact that when a customer joins Good Money, there is a market cap appreciation for the enterprise, which is how it works for any consumer brand in capitalism. When I join as a customer and use something regularly, I generate some portion of the aggregate market cap value of that business. And so why shouldn't we as a business give you, the consumer, some portion of the value that you're creating for us as part of your purchasing behavior? We're not entirely sure what the thresholds of that will be over time, but that is in the limit. We see that anywhere from 25% ownership to 75% ownership over a 15-year period.
Now, will the co-op owners have voting rights as well as an ownership stake?
Not until not until the ownership is registered. So that only will happen until, so there's an interim phase where there is no voting rights specific to their ownership. There will be voting rights as a user on the platform. Where do we focus our attention as a platform in terms of advocacy and activism? What kind of causes do we support? Those types of things, yes, people will be voting and there'll be community engagement around that. But in terms of their actual equity, in terms of their actual ownership being liquid, there will not be any voting rights until there's a registration of that.
Now, you mentioned an important concept just now that I had not mentioned before, and that is that you're giving some of the money to charity. Some of the money that you are, some of the profits will go to charitable causes, and you've also pledged some of your founder's stock to charitable causes. Tell us a little bit about where that will go and how that will work.
Yep. So I would just say broadly, the framing is actually impact, positive impact, right? So as somebody who's built a lot of nonprofits and built for-profits, you actually, the case for the hyper scalable impact I find is actually higher when a business has really dynamic positive externalities built into the architecture of that business, so that as the business scales in a large market, all of the stakeholders benefit, including people, customers, and the planet. And so it isn't that it's explicitly about giving the money to charity, because at the end of the day, what we're actually interested in doing is generating the most scalable impact possible. So that can be microloan programs to women in developing countries. That can be carbon offset programs. And these programs can be ROI positive. And in fact, they will scale and have more terminal velocity over time in the extent that they actually are profitable. And so our goal broadly is to identify, collaborate with, and fund profitable programs ultimately that actually drive more scalable impact. That doesn't mean that we aren't going to do lots of various types of philanthropic 501c3 charity-based activities. I do a lot of that personally as a philanthropist. But in the limit, what I see happening is that the greatest level of impact actually comes from social enterprise that can scale.
Speaking of investing, people have invested in your business. I mentioned the number $30 million. I hope that's correct.
It is.
Confirm that and tell us a little bit about who invested and what their investment thesis is.
Yeah, so the advantage of coming from previous businesses that have done well is there's obviously a track record that people can look at. My last business that I founded, Thrive Market, we've millions of Americans as users on the platform. We raised $200 million of capital, 600 employees in the last 4 years. That provided me a lot of framework to say, hey, look, we out executed in a $1 trillion grocery market against the likes of Amazon, and we can do that in the financial services space, which I would say arguably is way less sophisticated than Amazon is. And so that in itself has attracted investment capital. But what's been really amazing and heartwarming about the process is that the inherent business model self-selects for people who, yes, they care about making money because they are investors, but that's more of an organizing principle for them to deploy their capital around things that they really care about. And so we have a really broad coalition of over 30 investors, small and large, who deeply care in the mission of transforming financial services, democratizing ownership to everybody, and building a more equitable world.
Gunnar, as you've had a tremendously successful career. You've mentioned Thrive Market. You also have the jewelry business that's been successful. What are you most proud of having accomplished among all these things that you do that are so great?
I have been so blessed with the opportunity to make a lot of mistakes and have some successes along the way. I was a Latino immigrant here with a single mom as a child, and really experienced very kind of traumatic experiences early on around survival. And so I am a product of the American dream. The fact that I could come here as a first generation immigrant and have the opportunity to take care of my family and create hundreds of jobs that are great for others, and be part of this really important experiment around really harnessing this emerging secular consumer power, where people realize in the face of intense political, economic, and environmental dysfunction, they have power voting with their money and voting with their purchases. And, I think, when I really look at the kind of the scope of the challenges that we face as a species, one of the things that I draw a lot of hope and courage from really does come from the idea that we can go direct to consumer, we can build hyper scalable businesses with positive externalities as they are part of the core architecture, and that we can harness this collective desire to be part of a truly thriving future for humanity, and that we can harness this ability to vote with money and vote with our purchases. So, I hope to be part of serving that for the rest of my life. And I haven't, up until Good Money, I hadn't had the opportunity to kind of harness everything that I've learned and all the mistakes I've made in service to something that has so much potential.
As you reflect on your career again, what's the most important lesson that you've learned?
I would say that it is never to accept no. And I have had so many doors close on me. And, my mother is, she's one of my greatest heroes, just seeing how tenacious, creative, and generous she has been with such limited resources. And, I had the privilege of paying back scholarships that I had for school recently, and got to go speak to the students. And, my number one message to them was do what you love and never accept no.
Interesting. Profound advice. Gunnar, you alluded to your hippie roots to explain why this reinventing banking was important to you. I wonder if you would just take a minute and elaborate on the sort of motivation for Good Money.
Yeah, so I mean, as I kind of touched on earlier, growing up really poor, I saw money from very early on as a way to take care of people that I love and do good. We all come into the world with a very different set of cards. I came in pretty serious as a child. I think that was a function of lots of survival threats, and so I was inherently trained on how to escape those survival threats. And then as I went through my own journey, I had the privilege and honor in the second 20 years of my life to be able to make resources and take care of people that I love, and spend time focusing on how to direct those resources in a way that fills my life with meaning, but also evidences positive impact in the world. And, I think that, the truth is that I think we're just an enormously powerful species. And when our hearts and our minds are aligned towards a common purpose, history has shown that we can do absolutely incredible things. And I see just this vast untapped potential of our species. And, my goal as a human being, really at the most basic level, is both to free myself from all of the unconscious fears that, I'm working with inherently as a, insecure human being that's going through life as it is, and also to create tools for others to do the same thing. And, money, financial services, access to healthy food, the ability to access information that we can use to empower ourselves, that in the constellation of the full potential of a human life is something that I find really exciting to be part of.
Just to put this discussion in greater clarity, you've mentioned your early life a few times, and I wonder if you'd just take a minute and give some specificity to the survival threats you talk about and the challenges you faced in your earliest recollections.
Yeah, I mean, inherently as a Latino immigrant with a single mom, here, she couldn't flee, go back to Argentina because she was a political dissident and would have been executed. Just like we didn't have a lot of options, and it's that in itself, it just had a lot of uncertainty and volatility associated with it. And, she's, been amazingly courageous and admirable through that process. And when she remarried my stepfather, who actually started this intentional community that I grew up on, aka Hippie commune, I got exposed. I was so lucky and fortunate to have such a great man come into my life as a role model, but also, was really fortunate to be exposed to a whole different set of kind of priorities, thinking about simple things like being healthy and taking care of the land, and how does money work, and what is the concept of negative externalities. And I was exposed to Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States when I was 15, and that completely changed my life. So it was like all of us, it's an aggregate sum of things that make who we are. While there was a lot of trauma and uncertainty along that journey, both financial, sexual trauma, whatever it was, like we all have our deck of cards. It sounds cliche, but whatever doesn't kill us makes us stronger. And it's true. And really, at the end of the day, I fundamentally believe the things that happen to us actually give us the fuel to evolve and be our better selves. And, we're this next, 30 years, I fundamentally believe that people will look back at us, you and me, the people we know, the people they know, and they will say they were the ones that figured it out. They were the ones that turned around this calamitous, journey over the cliff, or they will say, what the heck were those people thinking? Like how could they have been so blind to the fact that the situation is actually so dire and on so many different levels? And I'm fundamentally an optimist, which is, why I'm excited to be here with you.
Well, thank you, Gunnar. You mentioned your mom coming from Argentina. I lived in Argentina in the early 80s for a couple of years. And so I can only imagine, I empathize a little bit with the experience she went through. Those were difficult, scary times. So
and dangerous.
Gunnar, what is your superpower? I very much use my business endeavors as a way to also just kind of constantly improve myself, and I'm constantly humbled by the mistakes that I made in the midst of successes that I've been blessed with. I increasingly, I spent so much of my childhood kind of covering up from the fact that I came from a hippie commune and I have a weird name and I have very kind of weird upbringing. And increasingly, I've come to realize that something that I have uniquely to offer is all of the uniqueness of that, and really embracing that, and embracing the idea that we really are incredibly powerful when our hearts and our minds are aligned. Well, we have lost Gunnar, but we had a great discussion with him. I'm grateful for the time he was willing to spend with us, and I'm sorry we didn't get to hear the full discussion of his superpowers, but clearly he does use his business acumen for good, and that is a great power. There will be links in the Forbes article to more contact information for Gunnar, including his LinkedIn profile and link to the website. So please check it out. And thank you all for joining us today. And let's do some good.
Thank you for listening. Devin Thorpe's mission is to end extreme poverty, improve global health, and mitigate climate change before 2045 by finding and sharing the stories of those who are doing the most good. You can join with other listeners to accelerate Devin's mission by visiting helpdevin.org right now.